go ahead and get started with the pledge. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I see everybody's recovered from May the 4th celebrations, so we'll move right into the agenda. We have the minutes of the April 7th, 2026 meeting. They're set out in your packet. Are there any additions, corrections, comments? Hearing none, do I have a motion?
Second.
Thank you. Dean and Mark? So moved. Let's start by introducing ourselves for the sake of the administrative assistant. I'm Kevin Brightsky, Porter County Surveyor.
Tom Vanderwood with NRC.
Jim Biggs, Porter County Commissioner's Office.
Mark Wojcik, Porter County.
Ryan Lissick, Dry Cleaning, Indiana.
Dean Button Hammond.
Jeff Hewitt, Cherville.
Mark Waddell, Chester.
Alex Losker, Butler, Fairmont, and Cypher.
Megan Knight, Dry Cleaning, Indiana.
Terry Martin, Carrier Gable. Jake Damerell, Butler, Fairmont, and Cypher. Charles Bradsky, NRC staff.
Scott Weber, NRC staff.
Candace Eklund, NRC staff.
Grace Bender, NRC staff. And Mike Knight, NRC staff.
Meredith Stelbo,
Thank you.
NRC staff.
Do we have any public comment today? If not, we're always open to public comment, but seeing and hearing no one, we'll move on. Planning, 2027 Metropolitan Transportation Plan update. Staff's going to make a presentation, and this is just to receive information.
Yeah, so Scott's going to go through some of the first phase, as I think some of you are aware of our MTP update, is to update all of our performance measures, which were adopted as part of the NWI 2050 plan. So now that we're going through the next iteration, we are going back to all those metrics and benchmarking our progress towards the goals that were identified in that plan. So we've done a number of presentations for the different committees. The last Transportation Committee meeting, we had a presentation on the demographic and land use and housing metrics, and environment as well. And so this month we're going to be kind of going through our transportation metrics, and Scott will go through some of those, and then I'll come in at the end and go over the active transportation measures. But just kind of by way of introduction, so this is kind of the conclusion of the first phase. All of these measures will be compiled into a document, which we'll then be using as we go out over the summer and conduct some public engagement activities and some stakeholder meetings. So we'll be today looking for any feedback from the committee as far as if there's something that sounds a little odd or maybe unusual, or you have further questions. We might have the answer to your questions today, but if we don't, it's good for us to know some things that we might need to clarify when we do our public presentations in our final document. So if you have any questions as we go through this, please just raise your hand or shout out. It's a small enough group, we can probably just have an informal discussion. So having said that, Scott can begin.
All right, yeah, thank you, Tom. And so I'm just going to go through some of these transportation slides that relate to, as we develop our 2050 plus plan update, we're thinking about the performance metrics related to transportation. So yes, I welcome any feedback. Feel free to jump in whenever I go through this. So I'll start with the freight section of transportation. So we've been looking at freight-related employment growth as one of the performance metrics here that we've been measuring. And we looked at from 2019 to 2024. We saw an increase in freight-related employment. That includes freight-related employment in about 5 sectors. It went from 117,756 to 120,024 between those 5-year periods. So that shows an increase in freight-related employment, and we think that that's due to our region's hub location as well as the e-commerce trends that captivated the consuming market over that period. While we also looked at not only freight-related employment, we looked at the actual amount of freight volume that was being moved. So this is as measured by weight, and looking at several different modes of freight. So we looked at truck, pipeline, rail, multiple modes, water, unknown, and air. And unlike where we saw an increase in freight-related employment, we actually saw relatively stagnation, relatively flat amount of freight being moved in that same period of time, as you can see across all these modes. So that, again, this is only capturing freight that either starts or ends in our region, so it doesn't include freight that purely passes through our region. But this shows that while there's been a lot of freight that's moved through our region in this whole period from 2017 to 2024, we don't really see any clear increases except for maybe recently with pipeline and a little bit with truck. But truck remains the dominant mode of freight transportation as measured by weight. Then pipeline's actually our second biggest mover by weight. Then rail is a distant third, and water is pretty low there. Now when we look at and air is almost negligible at the very bottom. When we look at as measured by value, again, we don't really see a clear increase or a clear trend of an increase. We see relatively stagnation, relatively flat from 2017 to 2024. Keep in mind this is not adjusted for inflation, so any increase you see is probably artificial at best. So again, but it shows that truck is even more dominant as measured by value of the commodities being moved than as measured by weight. Pipeline is still in second. Rail drops to below multiple modes when we look at by value, and air is actually a little bit more represented here by value than by weight, but it's still very far at the bottom. So we looked at those trends. We also looked at truck-involved crashes. So this is another freight-related metric, and this shows a heat map of where the truck-related crashes occurred in the 5-year period from 2020 to 2024 in the ARIES database, and we can see that there's a clustering of crashes, mainly where you have the highest truck volume along 8094 west of I-65, and then the stars represent where there were fatalities that occurred as a result of those truck crashes. So again, there's not necessarily a clear pattern in terms of where the fatalities are, but there's definitely a pattern in terms of where the greatest density of truck-involved crashes are along the major interstates. We also looked at truck travel time reliability. This is a federally required performance measure that we have to report on to the Federal Highway Administration and INDOT. And so this is a measure, as has been presented in this committee in the past, about how reliable truck transportation moves on our interstate system. So the higher the index value, the more unreliable, that is the more unpredictable time it would take to move trucks through. And the lower the value, or the more green on this map, is the lower index means that it's more reliable, that it's more predictable about how long trucks will take to move through that interstate segment. So as we can see here, there's really only a couple of problem areas that appear in this, and keep in mind this is only one particular year in 2025. And so that might be influenced by one particular construction season, for example, on I-94 near the Michigan state line. But you can see those two problem areas mainly being I-8094 west of I-65 and I-94 approaching Michigan. And then this is looking at freight rail incidents that occurred from 2021 to 2025. So now we're looking at the rail system, whereas before we were looking at the truck system. And we looked at incidents in 3 categories. We looked at non-crossing incidents. These are types of incidents that might just have to do with equipment failure that isn't necessarily near a crossing that the freight rail has to go through. We also looked at highway rail crossings. These are incidents that occurred at crossings, whether they be motor vehicle or pedestrian. And then we also looked at trespassing incidents, which were incidents that occurred at a conflict of 2 different modes that were not located at designated rail crossings. And then we looked at the total of all those types of incidents. And as you can see, the trend here from 2021 to 2025, we saw a spike in incidents, mainly led by the highway rail crossing incidents. As we can imagine, we have a lot of rail crossings in this region, over 550, so that it would make sense that that would be a major category of these incidents here. And trespassing incidents were the lowest, except for in 2021. They were just slightly higher than non-crossing incidents. And then we also looked at a performance measure related to blocked crossings in terms of the duration of the crossing. So everywhere you see a dot is a crossing location where we measured the duration of blocked crossings from the Federal Railroad Administration from 2021 to 2025 data. And the color and the size corresponds to how long that crossing was blocked in total for that period. And as you can imagine, we had the greatest issue with blocked crossings in the far northwestern area of our region, particularly in Hammond, East Chicago, Whiting, where we have kind of the most crossings. But we saw some issues still in various areas, like in the Chesterton area and the outskirts of LaPorte as well, where we saw some areas of block crossing. But still, this is a major issue for our region. We're well aware of that, but it's good that we have a performance measure to try to track that going forward as we develop this next plan update. We also looked at now kind of shifting gears from freight to just roads in general. This is looking at commute trend changes between various areas of our region. So this is looking at snapshots of the year 2016 on the left and 2023 on the right. And it's really hard to see any discernible pattern change in this graphic here. There are slight differences in that slightly fewer commuters were going from our region to Illinois between 2016 and 2023, but not by a large number. As you can see, for example, from Lake County, it went from 42,118 down to 41,270, so a pretty negligible difference for a 7-year period. But we also saw slight increases of commute trends from our region to other parts of Indiana. So from Lake County to other counties in India that aren't our 3 counties went up slightly from 2030 to 2084. And also in Porter County went from 1,489 to 1,592. So very slight changes in this pattern. This is based on tax return data from Stats Indiana, which means that it doesn't necessarily capture workers that don't work in the office full time, because it's just looking at what their workplace is. So it's possible that these quote unquote commutes are possibly telecommutes a lot of the time too. So again, we don't have great data about from this data source that's showing that these are actual physical commutes, but we can see that there wasn't much of a change in that overall kind of work pattern picture between 2016 and 2023. But then this is a federally required measure, looking at the commute mode share. So we want to see a decrease in drive alone percentage. That's what the targets are for our region. And we actually have to agree on a target with the entire Chicago urbanized area with the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning. These numbers are just reflective of our 3 counties, so that's not quite the same, but we still track the same measure here for mode share. So that mode share of drive alone decreased slightly from 84.2% in 2017 down to 80.4% in 2024, and you can see that graphed on the right as well, that light blue line at the top. It is still the most dominant mode share. In that same period of time, carpool relatively stayed the same, 7.4% to 7.5%. Transit did go down about half, from 2.2% to 1.1%. We think that number is going to rebound slightly. Again, this data are slightly lagged, so even though it says 2024, that might be reflective of what occurred a little bit earlier as well. So we think that that number is probably going to start to increase post-COVID a little bit. Walk share stayed relatively the same. It went down a little bit from 1.5% to 1.2%. Telecommuting, as you can imagine, in that period went up by quite a bit, from 3.2% to 8.4%, and then other remained about the same. So again, the major takeaway here is that most of those drive-alone trips seem to have been absorbed by an increase in telecommute, but it's a little bit hard to say for sure. But that's kind of what we would imagine would be the case. We also looked at a performance measure related to community crossings grant matching program. So this is showing from the 2016, when the program was first authorized, all the way through 2025. And this is just kind of a proxy to see how much investment is going into maintaining the asset condition of our local system here in Northwest Indiana. And so the bar graph at the bottom, the stacked bars are showing the total amount of investment across all of our communities in our region. And the line chart at the top is showing the number of communities that were awarded grants in those years. So this is kind of showing both in the same graph here. As you can see, that the total investment peaked in 2024, which also were a total of 37 out of the possible 44 I think it's 43 possible eligible communities were funded. So that's actually a pretty good story right there. But unfortunately, from 2024 to 2025, there was a big drop-off in the awards for community crossings mesh matching programs, and that number is probably only going down if we were to measure it in 2026 as well. It has helped our region a lot, especially in the late 20-teens and early 2020s, but we can't necessarily expect that will continue. And then we also looked at pavement condition. This is another federally required performance measure. So we looked at the International Roughness Index, which is how we measure the distinction between good, fair, and poor pavements. And again, we want there to be a higher percentage of good and a lower percentage of poor in general. However, fair is perfectly acceptable as long as it's within a plan for an asset management to improve it. But we can see here, this is in 2023. In general, we see pavements are in pretty good condition. Of course, there are pockets of poor pavement condition, particularly in areas like US 30 near the state line, State Road 55 just south of Crown Point, State Road 39 between LaPorte and Union Mills, that area. But other than that, I mean, the pavement in general is looking pretty good here. And we also looked at bridge condition, another federally required performance measure. For the federally required portion, we only have to look at the national highway system bridges, which I'll show you in the next slide, but this is showing all of the bridges in our region. And we can see that in general, road bridges are mostly in good and fair condition on the interstates and major arterials, but the counties struggle to come up with the funding to maintain bridges, and so that's why most of the red dots are more in the kind of peripheral bridges in the county locations. And then again, this is showing bridges just on the national highway system. So if you look at the difference between this slide, this is all of our bridges and bridges just on the national highway system. This is the performance measure that actually counts toward our federally required performance measures. It's looking much better, but again, these are bridges that are pretty much all INDOT maintained and funded. So you can imagine that they're in usually better condition. Another performance measure that we were looking at was mean speeds. So this is just using the probe data that we have access to, the National Performance Measure Research Data Set that Grace has presented about recently in terms of some of the performance measures that we look at in terms of travel time reliability and the Truck Travel Time Reliability Index. But from that data set, we also just get raw speeds. And so this is showing the map of what those speeds are. And the idea here is that we want to see higher speeds, meaning just greater mobility in general. So that's a target that we'd be aiming for. Not always in downtown areas. You don't want high speeds, but just looking at the overall kind of regional picture here. And you can see that our interstates generally perform, keep in mind these are mean speeds, perform at or above the posted speed limit of 70 miles per hour. And then certain arterials like US 30, US 41, we see pockets of where the mean speeds are far below their posted speed limits. And then, in addition, we looking at performance measures related to crashes. So this is just a heat map showing all of the crash locations in our region, regardless of how severe they are. So looking at property damage only crashes as well as injury and fatal crashes of various degrees. And we can see that the pockets where crashes occurred most often were in areas that had the densest road network and also the highest volume of traffic in general. That would make sense, as evidenced in this map here. The northwest corner of our region has the highest density of a road network and the highest volume in general, in the most intersections. And then, so this is all crashes. Now we're looking just at injury crashes in this slide. So injury crashes are even more clustered in areas with higher speed, so a little bit closer to the interstates and a little closer to those major arterials than just anywhere that has a dense road network. That's kind of the pattern we're seeing here. And then looking between, here's injury crashes and here's fatal crashes. This is a little bit more randomly distributed than injury crashes. However, they are still most pronounced in areas with higher speeds and near intersections. Okay, so now I'm shifting gears to talk more about transit. So far I've talked about freight and roads. Now we'll shift into transit. So our colleague Stephen is not here to present on this, so I will do my best to go through these slides. But this is looking at a map of the transit service areas in our region. So the polygons show the rectangles. Oops, sorry, I thought that was the laser pointer. Yeah, here we go. The polygons show the demand response service areas here, and then the lines show where there's fixed route service. And then dots, if you can see any, they don't show up extremely well, but those are where the stop locations on the fixed route transit service is. So this is kind of just the map of the overall transit service across our region, and we have, pretty good coverage overall, especially when you take into account the transit service areas for the demand response providers, like Opportunity Enterprises, North Township, Valoride Transport, Lake County Community Services, and Porter County Aging Community Services. But we see some gaps, especially, of course, in rural LaPorte County. And also, this has added the Monon Border, which is no longer a future station, I guess. So, there you go. So, again, that's just looking at the overall picture of the transit service area in our region. And then we also, so as a performance measure, we looked at the population change near the fixed route transit providers. And to do this, we looked at a quarter mile around all of those fixed stop locations on the fixed route transit network. And we looked at the trend from 2014 to 2024. And we looked at the population that was within a quarter mile of those stops on fixed route transit lines. And the trend here is that you can see the number went from 89,518 in 2014 to 132,972. While the total population of our region increased from 680,734 to 787,114. So the percentage of the population that was served by fixed route transit increased from 12% to 17% in that 10-year period. So that is a positive trend that shows that the population is being served more efficiently and effectively by transit in that 10-year period. And then this is kind of spatially what that looks like when we map it out. So this is looking at that 10-year period from 2014 to 2024, and the colors of these dots or pixels around are the areas around those fixed routes, the stops on the fixed route lines within a quarter mile. And so anywhere you see some kind of shade of purple, that's where the population increased in that 10-year period, and anywhere you see a shade of yellow is where the population decreased in that 10-year period. And what this shows is that we see a lot of, we know overall population increase, so we know that the purple is going to win out overall if you were to take everything into account, but we want to see where that occurred. And we can see that there's still a lot of pockets of the yellows and oranges up in some areas of Gary and North Merrillville, and then there's still in Michigan City, kind of on the southwest side there. So there's an opportunity, that means, to try to incentivize population growth in those areas, because we know that that population was there 10 years ago more than it is now. So there's still an opportunity with the infrastructure there to kind of improve that existing service. But we also see overall that a lot of the areas where transit expanded, population increased, which is a good sign too, because that means that maybe if you build the transit line, then people will also move there. So I think that's kind of showing a good trend overall. But it also shows that there's an opportunity for infill development for population growth in those areas that already have transit. So now that was just the total population. Now we're looking at the trends for what we classify as the traditionally underrepresented population. And so what we want to see with this performance measure is that a greater percentage of the traditionally underserved population are being served by transit. In other words, that transit is serving those that most rely on transit. And so what this shows in that same 10-year period from 2014 to 2024 is that so we'll start with looking at kind of this column here. This is the total underrepresented population of our region. That actually went down from 2014 to 2024, and that should be taken as a good sign. We'll have to look into more about what caused that. But basically, that population went from 197,644 in 2014 down to 156,973 in 2024. Now, of that we'll look at the component of that traditionally underrepresented population that's been served that is within a quarter mile of the fixed route transit. That number increased in that same 10-year period from 51,702 to 65,940. So the percentage of the traditionally underserved population that's being served by fixed route transit increased quite a bit, from 26% to 42% when we look at that metric. So that's good, and we want to continue to see that type of trend in the future. And then this is kind of mapping the areas served by fixed route transit in 2014. The next slide will show 2024, but we'll start with looking at this slide. All of these dot locations are areas within a quarter mile of a fixed route stop, so these are the areas around those stops. If it's red, that means that the majority of the population around that stop is considered traditionally underrepresented communities. And then if it's a blue dot, that means that the area around that stop does not meet the threshold for being traditionally underrepresented population. So you can see that in the northwest portion of our region, we have more red dots. That's where we generally see a higher amount of, a higher concentration around those stops of what we would classify that meet the threshold for traditionally underrepresented communities. But there are still red pockets, of course, in other areas of our region as well. And then the blue dots tend to be a little more in the periphery. But all of these dots are locations that are within a...
You have a question.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt while you were speaking. Are any of these new routes?
Yeah.
Right, where some transit organization added a new route to improve service to those communities?
So this is showing 2014. So some of these would have been, I'll show you the next slide where you'll see more dots in total.
Sorry.
But some of these could have been new from 2014 that weren't there slightly before 2014, for example. But so it'll make more sense when I go to the next slide here. Okay, so now if you look at the difference between these two slides, it's looking at 2014 and 2024. You can see an expansion of the system is evident now, right? Because you see more total dots, greater coverage across our region. And the percentage of the dots that are red is actually now higher in 2024, but that again, that's a good sign because that means that the transit is better serving the traditionally underrepresented communities. That's what we're trying to show here on the map here.
It would appear one of the greatest improvements was Gary Transit.
Yeah.
Where's David Wright?
Yeah, so we see a big expansion of the GPTC system between 2014 and 2024, as you can see here. And it's disproportionately benefiting the traditionally underrepresented population, which is good. That's what we're trying to show here. All right, so I think, and then lastly, in terms of transit, we looked at the employment change. So now we've been talking about population, but now I'm going to talk a little bit about employment change within a quarter mile. Again, the same threshold, a quarter mile of the fixed route transit stops. And on here, basically any shade of green you see are green and above, so green, dark green, blue are kind of that brownish purple color. Those are all population or employment increases, and only the light color is an employment decrease. And so you can clearly see this paints a good picture of employment tending to grow in that 10-year period around fixed route transit, which coincides with all of our planning goals of transit-oriented development here at NERC and with our partners. So that's a good sign overall. But there are still pockets of where in that 10-year period we saw a decrease in employment around transit. So there's still opportunity perhaps to strengthen those areas as well. But overall, transit has been leading in increase. We don't know whether it's a chicken or an egg, whether the transit investment and expansion increases employment or whether employment tends to like to go to where there's transit. So this metric doesn't necessarily theorize about which one is better, but it just measures that employment is kind of growing in that period of time. All right, so if there's any questions about any of the sections that I mentioned, I'll pass the baton over to Tom to talk about active.
Nobody has any questions for Scott? I do have one. We've got 2 federal bridges that apparently are in poor shape. Lake County has 1. What do we do about it?
So we're looking at the bridges here. Hold on. Okay, so these are the national. Are they on this map?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, I see. So we will have to look into, this is a snapshot in time in 2025. So we didn't necessarily provide any background research in this analysis about whether there's already any projects programmed on these, so we can look into that. It's possible that we realize that INDOT and other agencies are looking at the same exact data set in the National Bridge Inventory. They actually supply the data for this, so they're probably aware that these bridges are in poor condition. But again, being a snapshot in time, I don't want to generalize about whether or not there's a project that's already addressing that. We hope that there might be, and we should look into that.
Well, yeah, I think we should research it from an NERC standpoint, just to find out where the state and fed are at this point.
I can get that list.
Thank you. So, with no questions for Scott, let's go to Tom.
And I will be brief, and I'm filling in today as well for Mitch, who's at a Indiana Trails Conference. So I will kind of just go briefly through the active transportation performance metrics. So when we talk about active transportation, we're talking about walking and biking, scootering, I suppose, as well. So we look at a few different networks. So the first one that we're looking at is the regional trail map, and this would be the map. This is a snapshot of our current regional trails. So this would be all of the off-road multi-use trails in the NERC region. You can see that we have, again, a pretty good network of regional trails kind of concentrated in the Northwest. There do tend to be some gaps in sort of the more southeastern portion and really the southern areas of our county. This is a legacy of the abandoned rail lines, of course, in the northwest corner of our region. So in addition to the regional trail map, in NWI 2050 Plus, which is our current long-range plan, which we're now in the process of updating, we developed what we call the active transportation network. So this includes both those off-road trails as well as 47 corridors which will connect all parts of the region to those trails. So if you imagine those off-road trails as being sort of the interstate highway system, this is kind of the arterial and collector network that leads into those trails. And it also uses various street corridors to connect cities and towns that don't have that legacy of abandoned rail lines. So, let's look at our notes here. So each one of those corridors is broken down into segments, and it includes both on-road regional routes, which would be identified in our plan as either having a side path or something, and it also includes what we would call complete streets corridors. So if you can see, it's kind of hard to see here, but the most visually prominent aspects of this network on this map are really the on-road regional routes, and those are those lines in red. You can see they're kind of connecting all of the communities using our existing road network. So those are like the frameworks that we use, and that's kind of like our guiding vision for building out our active transportation network in Northwest Indiana. And then we also have been tracking actual performance measures related to this network. And most of the signs are actually very positive, so you'll see some really positive charts in the next few slides. And you can see in 1990, we had 13 miles of off-road paved trail. We now have 210 miles. So that's a very significant positive increase in the number of trails. It says it there, 1,515% growth. Unfortunately, what that means is actually we've built out a lot of those available abandoned rail corridors. So now we are looking at that regional active transportation network more closely because some of that low-hanging fruit has already been harvested. In addition to the number of trail miles that has increased, we're also tracking a select number of trail counts. So some of our some of our trails, we actually have trail counters that we have installed over the years. Now this is a sample, so we would call this a representative sample of the overall region because we don't have a trail counter on every trail. But those that we have been counting on, we have seen a significant jump in usage. So again, you're talking, 127% increase in the use of our trails. And that can include, as you can imagine, both sort of people who are going on these long trips on bikes, but there are, for example, our highest trail counter is in Wicker Park in Highland, and we imagine that the majority of those users are simply walking the loop for recreation. And then, so this kind of speaks to the overall active transportation network. We have seen another large increase in the number of bike lanes, striped bike lanes, marked bike lanes on our roadways. And again, a dramatic increase over the past 8 years from 2.5 miles to almost 18 miles.
Question.
Yeah.
Do you know if that's shared roadway or just dedicated bike lanes?
That's a good question. I think, I don't have that on the note. I can find that out for you. My guess is it probably includes the shares because that's a significant portion of those lanes. But I can check on that. Similar to transit, we're also tracking the population within a 1/4 mile of a trail. And we use a 1/4 mile because that's sort of a proxy for a 10-minute walk. So if you live within a 1/4 mile of a transit station or a bike trail, that means you can access that amenity without having to get into a car and drive to the station or drive to the trail. So that's, if you didn't catch on to that, but that's kind of why we use that 1/4 mile for so many of our metrics. And again, so we've seen since 2018, doubling the number of the percentage of the population that's within a 1/4 mile of a trail or bicycle facility. Similar to transit, this, we don't necessarily know, just looking at this metric, does that mean that there are more people living within proximity to an existing trail? Or does it mean that the expansion of the trail network has been able to capture more people? We think it's probably a combination of the two. And similar to transit, there is a concept that we have been trying to promote called transit-oriented development. And this is the idea that you use, trail-oriented development. This is the idea that you use your trail as an amenity for your community. So it brings people into your community and you can develop around that. And then this just kind of speaks to the same metric, but it would be a trail that crosses jurisdictions. So we're talking about regional scale trails here. And again, we're seeing a positive increase in the percentage of the population that has access to those trails. Unlike when you see an increase in vehicle miles traveled and an increase in roadways, injuries and fatalities normally go up. With trails, it's actually the opposite. We're seeing that with the increase in the network and the safety, the investment in various safety measures on those trails, we've actually seen a reduction in injuries and fatalities even as our network has increased. So that's a positive sign. The one negative metric in this bundle is the percent of adults reporting physical inactivity. This is a metric that we want to see go down. We want to see more of the residents of our region being active. In this case, we've actually seen approximately a 1.5% increase of adults reporting to be physically inactive. And our challenge is to build our network such that it makes it easier to live an active lifestyle. That's sort of one of the the goals that we have as a regional planning agency. So that concludes the active transportation metrics. If there are any questions, I'll take them. But again, if you have any questions, like as a follow-up, feel free to reach out to any one of us. Again, we want to make sure that our information is clear when we have these public meetings so that we can get a strong reaction and identify the priorities of the residents of Northwest Indiana. So if you have any comments that you want to follow up with, please get in touch with me or Scott.
For today, do we have any questions? Any comments? I would like to mention, we've had some people come in during the first presentation. Kay Nelson, thank you for coming. Max Raylander and George Topol.
Had a long commute.
Also representing American Structure Point, Chris is here. Thank you all for coming. We'll move on to the next section, programming, with Charles Bradsky. He's going to be addressing Resolution 2608, Amendment 26-06.1.
Good morning. Morning. The public comment report for the current TIP, which is the 2026 to 2030, is shown on page 3 of the packet. And as per usual, we did not get any public comments. And also during this time, we did not get any, this is public comments on these or any other amendment or projects in this amendment. And also during this time, we did not get any comments from the Interagency Consultation Group, which is the technical group consisting of NDOT, IDEM, EPA, Federal Highway, Federal Transit Administration. Moving on to page 4 is resolution for the May amendment. And we're asking for recommendation on this resolution and amendment. For this project, for this amendment, there are 17 projects, and the list of those projects or a general outline of what those projects are included on page 4. As for NDOT, I did not give any project number or anything like that. We do not have any control over those, but for the local projects, I do show the community as well as what type of project they have in there. Are there any comments on those on page 4? Those projects. The list of the projects with the resolution starts on page 5 and then goes through the rest of the packet. So if you would like to look at or any other community, look up those projects, find out the exact change. And there is a brief description on page 4.
So it's just Cedar Lake and a few bridge projects,
Yes.
not much on it.
No, there's some trail counters for everybody,
Yeah.
for the locals. And Cedar Lake, this is one of the HSIP projects that was awarded last year. A lot of communities are finding that these smaller projects have the same requirements as any other project, and so therefore, so some of the issues are with the environmental process and the cost of that environmental process. So therefore, it doesn't justify accepting the federal funds. So they are opting to give those federal funds back. They haven't expended any funds on that, but they're opting to give those funds back and do the project on their own.
Any questions for Charles?
Okay,
It's petty perhaps, but why is NDOT deciding they're deleting the project to do pavement marking? And how widespread is that pavement marking that's not going to get done for those of us who have trouble seeing pavement marking at night?
so I would say that the reason they are deleting that project is they are probably going to be doing that. They might be doing that with in-house courses.
Okay.
There's actually, I can't say one way or the other. I can call NDOT and I can ask NDOT.
Just some, this crazy old lady down the hall wants to know. Thank you.
I will put that in there.
Appreciate that. Maybe they can make a report at the commission meeting in a couple weeks.
Yeah, well, and generally NDOT is here, so they might be able to address that.
I agree, Kate, we're all getting older.
And when your automatic car doesn't get you back in the lane because there's no markings on it, you know you're in bad shape.
Well, this would be for probably RPMs.
And that is what it is.
So RPMs are called raised pavement markings. So in the middle of the road,
Oh,
every now and then, there's a little
Those,
metal
yeah.
with a reflector on it, snow plowable. Snow plow hits it and goes over it. They might have expanded the project last year. There's a number of reasons why they're deleting this project.
Okay.
They might have two projects. I don't know the actual answer.
Just
I'll look
curious.
at it and
Thank
ask
you.
them about
Thanks.
We're looking for a favorable recommendation to the executive board for commission.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Dean and second by Jeff. Or Mark.
Mark.
Thank you. Mark.
I call for
Regardless, thank you. Any more comments, questions, consideration for that matter? If not, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone against?
Thank
So moved. Thank you, Charles. We also had, I think we had something else for you, Charles. The administrative modification report, number 2623.
I was so excited with the approval that
I wasn't gonna let you get away. And this is really for informational importance.
Yes. So the very last page of the packet, on page 23, is the administrative modification report for administrative modification 26-23. And this was for the April administrative modification that was sent in. And it shows that there were two NDOT projects on there. First one was to increase funding in 2027. And the second one was to increase funding also for design. For locally sponsored project, East Chicago increased their funding for one of their projects. Gary moves a project from FY29 to FY27. That project was actually in FY26 and could not meet the schedule and therefore had to move out. But we've had some extra funding in 27, so they're moving in. They're also, so that's what's going on with that one. Hammond has an increase in their road reconstruction for increase in funding. Munster, again, increase in funding. A lot of these were just updates to, as they submitted their progress, their quarterly meeting progress reports. We noticed that there's an increase in the funding, so therefore we included that increase in there. And so these are just kind of a technical, just updating those costs. And then Porter County, we moved some right-of-way funding for their Willow Creek Road project, moved it from FY26 to FY27. There are the environmental issues taking a lot longer time than was expected, so that project, the funding for right-of-way for phase one has been moved from FY '26 to FY '27.
Basically, this is just for your information. It's relatively new process we've been trying to do to help out the administration.
Yeah, these are all minor changes to, in the tip. So this is just kind of giving everybody a report of what changes we are. This is, the only requirement for these minor changes is an email from NERC to NDOT to make the changes. And so that we're just reporting that these are the changes.
I'll just add that the memo in the agenda packet is just a summary. The full detail of all these project changes is included in the electronic packet that is posted on the website. We do that simply because there's often a lot of these administrative modifications that take place during a month, so to print them all out would be a kind of a waste of paper. So if you have any specific questions about a project, the agenda is posted 1 week prior to the meeting and you can review them electronically.
Do you have any specific questions for today? Anybody? Hearing and seeing nothing, let's move on to the report from Dry Clean Indiana. I know he has nothing to say. Never does.
Okay.
Just
Just back on 5 more minutes.
Sounds like
Okay.
a challenge.
Okay, right. Well, I expected that anyway.
And I have notes and I have handouts too for what I'm talking
All right.
about here today. So,
And prices.
and prizes, yeah. Okay. Okay, so we still have some Tesla wall charger donations and we're deploying them. We're almost going to be all out of allocations. So if there's any interest in having a Tesla charging station, wall connector, and pedestal for your community, please let us know. We do have some GM level 2 fleet chargers available. There is going to be some grant funding coming up from IDEM. It's going to be related to clean diesel replacement vehicles. And so please reach out to me if you have any interest in that. It has not been announced yet, but it's going to be coming out. Go EVIM project updates. The big takeaway is our program has been very successful and there's a lot of charging infrastructure and fast charging infrastructure that's being implemented across Northwest Indiana. And then there's no big updates from Indiana Department of Transportation regarding the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure funding. They're still working on contractual requirements related to their 2024 RFP. So no new funding coming out from that program. As it relates to upcoming events, there's going to be a meeting here related to the sustainable communities at NERC on June 6th from 9 a.m. to noon. We have the Crossroads Clean Energy webinars coming up on May 13th and June 17th. We have our Clean Air Golf outing on August 25th. And then we have the DCI Clean Technology Conference over here in Blue Chip on November 18th. I have handouts for all of those. And please let me know if you have any questions. All right, thank you all.
Be happy, I guess. Let's move on to staff announcements. Case replacement. Don't go.
Too bad.
Kay is retiring, from what I understand. This is an appointment of Michelle Murdy,
Verde.
Parizo, or Parizo?
Freezer.
So she's serving as forum's representative on the following committees: Transportation Committee, Environmental Committee, and MWI Truck Parking Study.
And also think, what's Iman's
Economy in place.
economy in place?
I knew something was missing here, so
If I can have a point of personal privilege for a moment.
please.
So I've been working in Northwest Indiana for 49 years, effective this month. And in all 3 of my jobs, I have sat on NERC commission meetings as an appointed person. I might be worthy of getting some sort of pat on the back for having done that many meetings with you guys over the years. But Should've said that. So, but when I got assigned to the transportation committee, I was like laughing, and I'm like, I drive 25 miles to work, but I know nothing about what you all do, and that goes to all the NERC people back there too, as regarding it, and I really appreciate the fact that, for the most part, Dean may have slipped a couple times. Nobody has really rolled their eyes at me when I've asked questions that I don't understand, and I'm leaving this with much better understanding of stuff. So, thank you very much, and see you later, alligator.
We can't thank you enough. You work with Kay on environment as well as transportation and economy. And she's always made major contributions, regardless of how she felt about her questions. They were genuine contributions, so I appreciate it.
And I'd like to support that too, because Kay's been on my committee for a long time.
She's
And
just a
I've
glutton
learned
to
a lot
work
from
with
Kay
us,
over
right?
the years.
You know, it's important, and I hope that Michelle can manage her schedule well enough to be able to continue to do the same level, because it really does help the economic development people better understand the process. You know, you're just not gonna put a road someplace because you want to put a road there. There's a whole lot that goes into it. And it's kind of fun sharing the transportation delay with the environmental delay. I mean, you know, every once in a while, it's just nice not to be the only subject matter holding something up.
And you actually started with item, didn't you?
No, I spent 18 years in East Chicago.
You should call it.
Started at the sanitary district there and did a whole bunch of different things there. And then in 95 to 98, I went to ITEM. And in 98, I decided to go back to being part-time. And Mark Rushkin said, oh, you need to come to the forum. And I've been coming to forum meetings, environmental committee meetings, since the 80s. So I've just been around a long time. I'm old. I'm 71 years old today.
Hey,
That's 71. 71's gonna be fun.
We're
Promise no more eye rolls.
Thanks, I appreciate it. That's the most important thing today.
Kay, you're still young. We're the same age, so
So just move a little slower at times.
just appreciate whenever you volunteer for any of the organizations around here, so thank you.
And if I can just say, yeah, from the NERC staff perspective, we have certainly appreciated working with you and your willingness to always participate in the various committees, and thankfully there are fewer now than there used to be, but there was a time when there were many more, and you were a pretty steady presence at those, so I appreciate that. And from a personal perspective, I personally appreciate having worked with you, and I learned a lot from you, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any other accolades so we can? You have really improved the conversations that I've been involved with for the last 30 years, so.
Well, I appreciate you saying that, and not everybody appreciates me asking questions, but as I remind my environmental managers at the industries, you have all this expertise, you have this whole level of understanding of a topic that not very many people pay any attention to. And so to make our presentations more beneficial to the recipients, I'm notorious for calling people out. They use acronyms, and also telling the professional geeks that they need to be less professional and more human.
That was a major contribution to stop using acronyms, because the rest of people out there might not understand what we're talking about.
I had a fun time a couple months ago. I got to facilitate a panel of environmental steel guys. I must have called them out at least 20 times on their acronyms during the course of the meeting.
Kay was also instrumental. I started out back in about 98, involved with the environmental committee, chairing that, and one of the issues I had with it was Amoco wasn't really represented. U.S. Steel, Bethlehem. We had a room full of environmentalists speaking to basically the technical and industrial issues we're having in the day. And we were blessed to have guys like Doug Blythe and Tom Easterly from the steel mills, and also some people from Amoco that came that were technical experts in it, that helped us work out some solutions, practical solutions with the environmentalists. But I walked into a committee that was pretty much packed with people of a certain purpose that this broaden the accomplishments.
Indiana was the only Great Lakes state that had a joint resolution of support with Great Lakes St. Lawrence River Compact between industry and environmental groups. We worked hard in Northwest Indiana, and as I lobbied at the State House, it was always a pleasure to be able to say, from the environmental perspective, that industry and our environmental groups, which we had 6 of them that were really strong back in the late 80s, early 90s, sat down at tables and talked about things. Not always pleasantly, but we learned from each other.
That's the only way to get this done. Thank you again, Kay. Do we have any other staff updates or announcements?
I have 2 updates. The first is the road safety audit contract was approved, so we will be proceeding with Corradino as our consultant to conduct those RSAs in 2026. The way that we're soliciting locations this time is a little different. What we've done is we've identified all the locations which are considered high crash, meaning they have a 1.25 index of crash cost or higher. And there's quite a number of those, but we're going to be pulling those out and contacting the communities that have those locations that are within those areas, and asking them to review that list and identify if there are any that they'd like to conduct a road safety audit on. Once we get those responses, we'll then choose those that have the highest ICC score. So our intent is to try to get the worst intersections handled before we take lesser intersections. So that's where we are on that. I think we'll be sending that around within a week or so. Okay, right, guys? We have that list, so we're just refining that. We'll send that out to so not everyone in this room may get an email with a request, but certainly some of you will.
There'll be more opportunities in the future, but it's a great program.
Yeah, the intent is to kind of like work our way down the list of the worst locations. And then on a similar note, we did publish finally the request for proposals for the Safe Streets for All Regional Safety Action Plan project. That is a that's a project that we're working on in partnership with Lake County, Porter County, and LaPorte County to conduct an overall regional safety action plan, coordinating with all the local safety action plans that have already been completed. So that was issued, that RFP was issued on April 23rd, and it closes on May 28th. So if there are any interested consultants in the room, please get your proposal in by that date. We hope to kick the project off mid-summer.
Any questions for Tom? I'll just point out that we've got the list of all the upcoming NERC meetings. Probably the most important is the NERC Executive Board will meet May 21st. And we won't have another meeting until August 4th, according to our agenda.
That's correct. We plan on
by design.
Yeah, we plan on taking the summer off for the Transportation Committee. I will say, if there is something that comes up where we need to schedule a meeting, we will do so. It will be on the regular first Tuesday of the month, but I don't foresee any emergency happening.
We have no problem having an emergency meeting if it suits our communities, but in this case, plan on meeting here in August 4th. Are there any other questions? Anything good for the cause? If not, do I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll motion.
Thank you.
Second.